Dust rose in the warm air as the old merchant wagon creaked down the narrow path. The wooden wheels groaned, shaking with every bump on the rocky trail. The driver, a tall alien with gray skin and wide black eyes, kept glancing over his shoulder while arguing with another trader walking beside him. Their voices were loud, sharp, and distracted. They didn't see that one of the straps holding the cargo on top of the wagon had come loose. A small metal capsule, no bigger than a child, wobbled dangerously at the edge. With every jolt of the wagon, the capsule slid an inch closer to falling. A gust of wind pushed it just enough, and it rolled free, bouncing off the wagon bed. It struck the ground with a metallic clang and rolled toward the bushes. No one noticed. The wagon kept moving, wheels grinding forward, the driver still arguing about prices and delivery times. The capsule stopped in the shade of a thick tree, hidden among roots and wild grass. The forest around the road was quiet, except for the distant call of strange birds. A faint hiss came from the capsule, a soft whisper of escaping air. A single red light blinked slowly on its side. Inside, something shifted. Jack, a human traveler with a weather-beaten jacket and a small backpack, was moving through the undergrowth not far away. He was searching for edible plants, bending low to examine a patch of green leaves. His knife was in his hand, ready to cut them, when he heard the faint, metallic sound. His head turned toward the noise. For a moment, he saw nothing but tangled branches and leaves. Then, just a glint of metal caught the sunlight. Curious, Jack stepped closer, pushing aside vines until he saw it fully. The capsule was dented in places, covered in strange markings he didn't recognize. It looked like no container he had seen before. The surface was warm under his palm when he touched it. The warmth was strange, too even, too alive. He frowned, running his fingers along the markings, feeling shallow grooves like writing. Then it happened. A soft, muffled tap came from inside. Jack froze, every muscle in his body tight. He pulled his hand back slowly, staring at the capsule. The sound came again, a bit louder this time, like small hands hitting metal. His mouth went dry. Something was inside. He crouched lower, pressing his ear against the capsule's surface. There was a faint, rapid breathing, almost like a frightened animal. Then he heard a weak, high-pitched sound, so soft he thought he imagined it. A voice, maybe. He sat back on his heels, eyes scanning the nearby road. The wagon was gone, only dust drifting in the sunlight. Jack tried to lift the capsule, and it was heavier than it looked. He shifted his grip, finding a small panel on the side with tiny blinking lights. A faint crack ran along the seam, as if the capsule had been dropped before. He tapped the panel, and the blinking light sped up, beeping softly. The tapping from inside became urgent, faster, more desperate. Jack's heart pounded. He slid his knife under the seam, trying to force it open, but the blade barely slipped inside. The mechanism was too tight. He gritted his teeth, pressing harder, when the panel suddenly gave a sharp click. A thin line of steam escaped as the seam opened slightly, releasing cold air that brushed against his face. Jack pulled the lid back an inch, enough to see inside. His breath caught. Curled up within the capsule was a small alien girl. Her skin had a faint blue tint, glowing softly in the shadows. Her hair, white as frost, clung to her face in frozen strands. Her eyes fluttered open for the briefest moment, revealing golden irises that seemed to shimmer even in the dim light. Then they closed again. She was barely breathing, her lips pale. Jack stared, unsure what to do. She couldn't be more than 12 years old by human guess. He glanced back at the road, a prickle running down his spine. Why was she inside this? Who put her here? The girl's small fingers twitched weakly, brushing against the edge of the capsule. She let out a faint, almost silent whisper in a language he didn't understand. Jack leaned closer, but her voice faded, and her hand fell limp. Somewhere far down the road, voices rose in the distance, angry, sharp, and growing louder. Jack straightened, clutching the capsule's edge. He could make out a few words, but not enough to understand. Still, the tone was clear. Someone was searching. His eyes darted between the unconscious girl and the sound of the approaching voices. His instincts screamed at him to leave it, to walk away before trouble found him. But his feet didn't move. The idea of leaving her there, helpless in whatever danger she was running from. He couldn't. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of dust and sweat from the road. Jack crouched lower, slipping his arms under the girl's tiny form. She was light, almost weightless, but still warm enough to tell him she was alive. He pulled her out of the capsule carefully, trying not to jostle her too much. The voices were closer now, the rustling of undergrowth, marking the approach of several figures. Jack's pulse raced. He glanced at the capsule, then back toward the trees. He could leave it to mislead them, but he had no time to think it through. Clutching the girl against his chest, he stepped quietly away from the road, his boots sinking into the damp soil. Every branch he brushed against felt like it cracked too loud. Every step seemed to echo. The voices reached the spot where the capsule lay, and he heard one of them shout sharply. Metal scraped as they lifted it, and then there was silence. Jack didn't wait to hear more. He pushed deeper into the forest, not daring to look back, the alien girl's faint breathing the only sign she was still holding on. Jack laid the alien girl down gently on the forest floor, her head resting on his jacket to keep it from touching the cold ground. Her skin still glowed faintly, but her breathing was shallow, uneven. He could feel the heat of her fever even through his calloused hands. The strange capsule lay only a few steps away, its lid slightly open, letting out thin trails of vapor that curled into the air before disappearing. He knelt beside it, studying the locking mechanism again. The outer shell had symbols carved into it, not like letters he knew, but they seemed to be arranged in a pattern. His fingers traced the grooves, hoping to find a way to open it properly. Maybe there was something inside, medicine, food, anything that could help her. The capsule's metal was still warm, though colder than before. Jack pressed against the seam, but it refused to move. He tried again with his knife, sliding the blade into the gap, forcing it to widen. The metal groaned softly, but then stopped, like it was resisting him on purpose. Frustration grew in his chest. He looked back at the girl. She stirred weakly, her lips moving as if trying to speak, but no sound came. Her eyes opened just a fraction, golden light catching the dim forest shade. It was like staring into a sunset trapped in a drop of water. For a moment, those eyes locked on his face, and he felt a strange pull, an unspoken plea for help. Jack tried again. This time, he ran his fingers along the capsule's side until he found a small raised square, almost invisible unless you touched it. When he pressed it, there was a faint click, and the seam loosened slightly. Cold air rushed out in a small burst, carrying a strange, sweet scent. He pushed the lid up just enough to peer inside. There was no extra equipment, no supplies, only the girl, curled tightly in a protective position. Frost still clung to her hair, tiny crystals melting and sliding down her cheeks. Her clothes were unlike anything he had seen before, thin layers of silvery fabric, marked with tiny glowing threads. One side of her arm had a faint bruise, as if she had been gripped too tightly before being put inside. She gave a faint cough, a sound so small it barely reached his ears. Then, with visible effort, she whispered in a language he didn't understand. The words were soft, breathless, and frightened. He shook his head slowly. "I don't understand you," he murmured, hoping his tone at least sounded gentle. Her eyelids drooped, but she fought to keep them open, staring at him as if trying to judge whether he was safe. He saw her fingers twitch, reaching for something. Her hand brushed against the capsule's wall, then slid weakly down. Jack caught her wrist carefully, feeling the faint throb of her pulse. She didn't pull away. He glanced toward the road again. The distant sound of voices carried through the trees, but they were fainter now, like they had moved further along in their search. Still, he knew it wouldn't take much for them to turn back. If they realized the capsule had fallen off, they'd come looking. Jack leaned closer, speaking slowly and clearly. "I'm going to get you out of here." She blinked slowly, as if she understood, though no words came in return. He slid his arms under her, lifting her fully from the capsule. She was lighter than she looked, her body tense as if she was bracing for pain. The warmth of her skin surprised him. It was the warmth of someone clinging to life, not the cold of someone giving up. Her head rested weakly against his chest, and for a moment, he could hear her breathing more steadily. Jack took a step back from the capsule. Something in his gut told him to leave it behind. It was too distinctive, too obvious. It would lead the pursuers straight to him if he kept it. But abandoning it in plain sight would be foolish. He dragged it into the thick bushes, covering it with leaves and branches. If they came searching, maybe it would slow them down. As he adjusted his grip on the girl, her head shifted slightly. Her eyes opened again, and this time her voice was a faint whisper in broken words that sounded almost like his own language. Cold? Safe? It wasn't perfect, but he understood enough. She wanted to know if she was safe now. Yes, he answered quietly. You're safe with me. He didn't know if it was a lie. He only knew he intended to make it true. She blinked once, slowly, then let her eyes close again. Her breathing grew steady for a few moments, and he felt the faint weight of her trust. He moved quickly but quietly through the trees, keeping to the shadows. The path ahead sloped downward toward a stream, and he followed it, knowing that water could mask his scent and footprints. The girl's head shifted against his shoulder as if she was listening to the sound of running water. A sudden crack of a branch behind him made him freeze. He crouched low, pressing himself against a tree, holding her close so her breathing wouldn't give them away. Through the leaves, he saw movement. 3 figures moving slowly through the forest, scanning the ground. They wore mismatched armor and carried long weapons with sharp tips that glimmered in the light. Their alien features were sharp, predatory. One of them bent to examine the ground near the road, then pointed toward the bushes where the capsule was hidden. The others followed. Jack's grip tightened around the girl. He knew they'd find it in seconds. That meant that they'd soon be on his trail. He turned away from the sound, heading deeper into the forest, letting the stream guide him. His boots splashed softly in the shallow water as he walked along its edge. The girl stirred, murmuring something he couldn't catch, then fell silent again. He glanced down at her. She looked so small, so fragile, yet there was something in the way she clung to him even in her sleep, like she had decided he was her only chance. Jack felt the weight of that choice, and it strengthened his resolve. He didn't know who she was, why she was in that capsule, or why armed strangers were chasing her. But he knew one thing. Whatever trouble she brought with her, he wouldn't hand her over. Not now. Not ever. Jack's boots sank into the damp soil as he pushed deeper into the forest, keeping the alien girl cradled against his chest. Every step felt heavier, not because of her weight, but because of the danger breathing down his neck. Her head rested limply on his shoulder, and her faint warmth was the only reminder she was still alive. The voices behind him were growing louder now. No longer distant, but close enough for him to hear the anger in their tone. Leaves rustled violently as branches snapped under heavy boots. They were chasing him. He quickened his pace, weaving between thick trees, his eyes darting for a safe path. The forest floor was littered with dry twigs, and every crack under his feet made him flinch. The girl stirred faintly, letting out a soft sound that was half whisper, half cry. He whispered back, "It's okay. I've got you." But in truth, he wasn't sure if he could keep that promise for long. A harsh shout echoed through the trees. Jack's heart jumped. They had spotted something. Maybe his tracks, maybe a broken branch where he passed. The voices multiplied, more than 2 or 3 now. They were spreading out, closing in from different angles. He ducked under a low branch and ran, his breath coming faster. The ground sloped downward suddenly, and he slid a few feet, struggling to keep his balance without dropping the girl. At the bottom of the slope, a thick tangle of bushes blocked the way forward. He gritted his teeth and forced his way through, ignoring the branches scratching his arms. Behind him, footsteps pounded closer, leaves crunching and weapons clinking. He reached a small clearing and stopped for half a second to listen. The wind carried their voices again, closer now but still above him on higher ground. He scanned the area frantically. To the left, dense trees. To the right, a line of jagged rocks. And ahead, a narrow path that disappeared between 2 steep ridges. It wasn't much of a choice, but it was better than standing still. Jack moved forward quickly, ducking into the narrow path. The air grew cooler here, the sunlight barely touching the ground. The walls of earth and stone rose higher on each side, almost like a canyon. It was harder to move quietly. His boots slipped on loose dirt, and small pebbles tumbled with every step. The girl shifted again, her fingers weakly clutching his jacket. Suddenly, a sharp voice called out from somewhere above, and Jack's blood ran cold. A shadow moved at the top of the ridge to his left. One of the pursuers had spotted him from above. The alien raised a long weapon, aiming downward. Without thinking, Jack dove sideways just as a sharp, glowing projectile hit the ground where he'd been standing. leaving a smoking hole in the dirt. The girl whimpered softly, her face pressing against his shoulder. There was no time to think. Jack bolted down the path, his legs burning as he pushed himself faster. Another shot rang out behind him, missing by inches. He could hear the aliens shouting orders, and more footsteps joined the chase. They were coming from both sides now, trying to trap him. His mind raced for an escape. Then he spotted it. At the base of the ridge ahead, a narrow crack in the earth led downward into shadow. It looked dangerous, like it might collapse, but it was better than being caught in the open. He rushed toward it and dropped to his knees, crawling into the gap with the girl held tightly against him. The narrow space was dark, damp, and smelled of wet stone. His shoulders scraped against the walls as he moved forward on his elbows. The sound of pursuit grew muffled, the shouts now above and behind him. One set of footsteps came dangerously close to the opening, and Jack froze, barely breathing. Through the small gap, he could see the legs of one of the armed aliens. The figure stopped, scanning the ground. For a moment, Jack thought it was over. But then another voice shouted from farther away, and the alien turned and ran toward it. Jack let out a silent breath, forcing himself to keep moving forward. The narrow tunnel opened suddenly into a hidden ravine, a deep cut in the forest floor hidden by overhanging branches. Sunlight filtered in weakly through the canopy, casting long shadows. Jack slid down the dirt slope into the bottom, his boots slipping but his arms keeping the girl safe. At the base of the ravine, he spotted what looked like the remains of an old wooden structure, half collapsed and overgrown with moss. Maybe an abandoned mining shack. It wasn't much, but it offered shelter. He rushed toward it, pushing the creaky door open with his shoulder. Inside, the air was musty and still, filled with the scent of rotting wood. Dust drifted in the shafts of light that slipped through the gaps in the walls. Jack set the girl down gently on a broken bench in the corner. She was breathing a little better now, though still unconscious. He brushed a lock of white hair from her forehead, noticing how cold her skin felt despite the warmth of the air. He turned back to the door, listening. The sounds of the hunters were faint now, but he knew they wouldn't give up. They'd search every inch of the forest until they found her. He had only bought them time, not safety. Jack looked at her again, the way her small hands curled slightly, as if holding on to something that wasn't there. Whatever her story was, it was worth killing for. He could feel it. And now, by taking her, he had put himself directly in the path of whoever wanted her back. The forest outside was quiet again, but Jack knew that silence was only a pause before the next storm. He sat down beside her, resting one hand on the hilt of his knife. If they found this place, he'd have to fight. And fight hard. Her breathing slowed, and for a moment she looked peaceful, almost like she was only sleeping. Jack allowed himself one deep breath. He didn't know what was coming next, but he knew one thing. He wasn't letting her go. Not now. Not while she still had a chance. The air inside the shack was damp and heavy with the smell of old wood. Jack sat near the door, his back against the wall, his knife resting across his knee. His eyes kept shifting from the doorway to the small figure lying on the broken bench. The girl hadn't moved much since he carried her in, but her breathing was steadier now. Shafts of pale light slipped through the cracks in the wooden walls, painting thin lines across her face. A faint rustle broke the silence. Jack's hand moved to the knife instantly, his body tensing. But the sound wasn't from outside. It came from her. Her head shifted slightly, and her fingers twitched as if she was trying to grab something. Then her eyes opened slowly, blinking against the dim light. For a moment, she looked confused, her golden eyes darting around the room as if unsure of where she was. Jack stayed still, not wanting to scare her. She turned her gaze to him, studying his face with a mix of fear and curiosity. Her voice, soft and shaky, broke the silence. "Are you human?" The words were clear, though her accent made them sound strange. Jack nodded once. "Yes." Her eyes widened slightly, and her lips trembled before she whispered, "You took me from them." He didn't answer right away. He could see the fear in her eyes, the way her shoulders tensed as if ready to defend herself. "They were chasing you," he finally said. "I couldn't just leave you there." Her gaze lowered, and her hands gripped the edge of the bench. "They were going to sell me," she said, her voice breaking, "to a warlord." She shivered, her thin silvery clothing offering no protection from the chill that hung in the air. Once sold, you never come back. Jack felt a knot form in his stomach. He had heard whispers of such things before, illegal markets where living beings were traded like property. He'd never seen proof, but now one of its victims was sitting right in front of him. He pulled off his jacket and gently draped it over her shoulders. She clutched it tightly, as though it were a shield. "They'll keep looking," she murmured. Her voice was quiet but certain. "They won't stop until they find me." Jack didn't need her to explain why. Someone willing to chase her this far wasn't going to give up easily. "Then we'll make it hard for them," he said, his tone calm but firm. Her head tilted slightly, confusion flickering in her eyes. "Why would you help me?" Jack thought for a moment, but the answer was simple. "Because I couldn't walk away." Something in his words seemed to ease her fear, even if just a little. She pulled his jacket tighter around her and leaned back against the wall. Her eyes closed briefly, but she wasn't sleeping. He could tell from the way her ears twitched slightly, as if listening for danger. Outside, the forest had grown quiet again, but Jack knew that was no reason to relax. He moved to the small gap between two planks in the wall and peered out. In the distance, a faint orange glow drifted between the trees. Torches. They were still searching. "They're close," he said quietly, glancing back at her. She sat up straighter, her eyes darting to the door. "If they find us here." She didn't finish the sentence, but the fear in her voice was enough. Jack checked the straps on his pack, making sure everything was ready to move. "We'll leave before they get this far." She hesitated before speaking again. "There's something you should know." Her hand lifted to show him a small device strapped to her wrist. It was smooth and metallic, with a single blinking light. "This tracks me. They can follow it." Jack's eyes narrowed. "Then we need to get rid of it." She shook her head quickly. "If I take it off wrong, it will send a signal. Shaq, they'll know exactly where we are." He moved closer, crouching beside her. "Can you disable it?" Her golden eyes met his, and for the first time he saw determination there. "I can try." She pressed her fingers to the side of the device, sliding open a hidden panel. Tiny wires and glowing threads pulsed faintly inside. Her hands trembled as she worked, muttering under her breath in her own language. Jack watched the door, every muscle in his body tense. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a sharp beep echoed in the quiet shack. Her eyes went wide. "They know," she said, her voice tight with panic. Jack didn't waste a second. He grabbed his pack and slung it over his shoulder, then lifted her into his arms. "Hold on," he said. She obeyed, wrapping her arms weakly around his neck. As he stepped outside, the glow of torches was closer, much closer. Voices called out, and somewhere behind them, the hum of strange machines filled the air. Jack's heart pounded. They had only minutes before this place was surrounded. He moved quickly along the ravine, using the shadows to stay hidden. The girl pressed her face into his shoulder, her breathing fast and shallow. The sound of the hunters grew louder, their footsteps crunching over fallen leaves and snapping twigs. Jack knew they couldn't outrun them forever, but he could at least buy more time. He scanned the darkness ahead, searching for a way out. The ravine curved sharply to the left, disappearing into deeper shadow. Without hesitation, he followed it, vanishing from sight just as the first torchlight reached the entrance of the shack they had left behind. The ravine twisted and narrowed, the ground uneven under Jack's boots. He moved fast but careful, holding the alien girl close so she wouldn't be jostled too much. Her breathing was still quick, and her eyes darted around in the dim light, scanning the shadows as if expecting danger to jump out at any second. She clutched his jacket tightly, her small fingers trembling. "They'll come for me," she whispered, her voice almost lost under the sound of his footsteps. That merchant wasn't just a trader. He works for a network, a very big one. They have ships, soldiers, hunters. If they find me with you, they will kill you too. Jack didn't slow down. Then we make sure they don't find us. She shook her head slightly. It's not that easy. They have ways to track, not just the capsule. He frowned, glancing down at her. You mean that thing on your wrist? Her gaze dropped to the small metallic device still strapped to her arm. Yes. It sends a signal every few minutes. If they follow it, they can find me anywhere. I was trying to turn it off before, but I couldn't finish. Jack stopped for a moment, setting her gently down on a moss-covered rock. Can you do it now? She hesitated, biting her lip. If I do it wrong, it will send an alert. They'll know exactly where we are. He scanned the forest, listening. The distant hum of something mechanical floated through the air. It was low, deep, and steady, a sound that didn't belong in nature. We don't have much time, he said quietly. Do it. I'll watch our backs. She nodded, her hands already working at the small panel on the side of the device. The metal clicked softly as she slid it open, revealing a tangle of tiny wires and faintly glowing circuits. Her fingers moved carefully, pushing at delicate parts, pulling at threads so thin they looked like hair. Jack kept his eyes on the ravine behind them, every nerve alert. The hum grew louder, joined by a faint, high-pitched whine. The sound was getting closer. It reminded him of scanning drones, machines that swept an area looking for heat and movement. If those things spotted them, hiding would be useless. How much longer? He asked, his voice low. Almost, she whispered, her brow furrowed. Beads of sweat formed on her forehead despite the cool air. Just one more wire. A sharp beep burst from the device. She froze, her eyes going wide. No, she breathed. I tripped the signal. Almost immediately, the deep hum in the distance changed tone, becoming sharper, faster. Jack could hear the shouts of alien voices now, urgent and excited. He snatched the device from her wrist and threw it as far as he could into the forest. It landed with a muffled thud in the leaves, still beeping. That should buy us a few seconds, he said. Without another word, he pulled her into his arms again and started moving. They left the ravine, pushing into thicker forest, where twisted roots clawed at the ground. The canopy overhead was dense, blocking most of the sunlight, and the air here felt heavier. Jack's breath came faster, his muscles burning as he climbed over a fallen log. The girl clung to him, her face buried against his chest. The hum of the drones was closing in fast now, sweeping side to side like predators sniffing for prey. Every few seconds, a sharp beam of white light pierced through the trees in the distance. Jack ducked low, moving from shadow to shadow, making himself and the girl as small as possible. Behind them, the sound of boots hitting the ground mixed with the steady drone noise. The hunters were moving in coordination, driving them toward an unseen trap. Jack's mind raced. He needed to break their pattern, do something they wouldn't expect. Ahead, a cluster of tall rocks rose from the ground, their jagged edges forming a partial wall. Jack headed straight for them. The girl lifted her head slightly, her voice urgent. You can't fight them all. There are too many. Not planning to fight them all, Jack replied, his tone steady. When they reached the rocks, he set her down and quickly began pulling loose stones and broken branches together. She watched, confused, as he worked. What are you doing? Making sure they regret coming this way. He wedged a thick branch between two rocks, tying it in place with a strip of rope from his pack. Then he balanced several loose stones above it, ready to fall with the slightest push. It wasn't much, but in a tight space like this, it could slow their pursuers or hurt them if they were unlucky. The sound of the hunters was close now, their voices just beyond the tree line. Jack grabbed the girl's hand. We're moving again. When they hit that trap, we get as far as we can. They slipped through a narrow gap between the rocks, crouching low. Jack led her down a steep slope hidden by ferns, the earth soft and damp under their boots. A moment later, the sound of crashing rock and startled shouts echoed from behind them. The trap had worked. Jack didn't stop running until the noise of pursuit faded into the distance. They found themselves at the edge of a small stream, its clear water glistening under filtered sunlight. Jack crouched beside it, letting the girl drink from his hands. She gulped the water down, her breathing still shaky. They'll keep coming, she said, her voice soft but certain. Jack met her gaze. Then we keep moving. For the first time, she didn't look afraid when she looked at him. Instead, there was a small flicker of trust in her golden eyes, as if she believed, just for now, that he could get her through this alive. The stream's gentle sound masked their footsteps as Jack led the girl along its edge, moving quickly but staying low. His shoulder throbbed from carrying her so far, but he ignored the pain. The sunlight was fading, and the shadows of the trees stretched long across the water. The air felt colder now, heavier, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. He knew the hunters wouldn't stop just because night was coming. In fact, the darkness might give them an advantage. The girl walked beside him now, instead of being carried, though she still leaned on him for support. Her steps were light but unsteady. Every so often, she glanced over her shoulder, as if expecting to see glowing eyes in the shadows. "They won't stop," she whispered. "They never stop." Jack glanced at her. "Then we give them a reason to." She frowned. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer right away. He was scanning the forest ahead, looking for somewhere he could use to their advantage. That's when he saw it, a narrow bend in the stream where the banks rose steep and high, almost forming a wall. Fallen branches and old tree trunks cluttered one side. It could work. Jack guided her toward the bend and motioned for her to sit in the shallow shelter of the bank. "Stay low, stay quiet," he said, pulling his pack off his back. She obeyed without argument, her eyes following him as he moved toward the pile of fallen wood. He worked quickly, dragging heavy branches into a rough barrier across the narrowest part of the path they'd just taken. It wasn't perfect, but it would funnel the hunters straight into a choke point. Then he pulled out a length of rope and tied it to a branch above, letting it hang down into the water. The girl's voice was soft but urgent. "You're going to fight them?" Jack tightened the rope's knot without looking at her. "I'm going to make sure they can't chase us anymore." Her eyes widened. "You'll die if they catch you." He gave a faint smile. "That's why I won't let them catch me." The hum of drones reached them again, louder now. Jack could also hear the crunch of boots on leaves, several of them moving fast. The girl tensed, her hands clutching the edges of his jacket like she didn't want to let go. He crouched beside her. "No matter what happens, you stay here until I come back. If I don't," he paused, then shook his head, "I'll come back." Before she could reply, the first beam of white searchlight cut through the trees, sweeping over the stream. Jack slipped into the water silently, letting the cold soak into his clothes. He crouched low, hiding behind the barrier of branches, waiting. The first alien soldier stepped into view, weapon raised. He moved cautiously, scanning the ground. Behind him came two more, and the faint hum of a drone floated just above their heads. Jack's grip tightened on the rope. He waited until the first soldier was almost at the barrier, then yanked hard. The branch above swung down with force, smashing into the lead soldier's head and knocking him sideways into the water. The second soldier reacted instantly, firing a shot, but Jack had already rolled behind a fallen log. The shot hit the water, sending up a spray of steam where it boiled away. The third soldier rushed forward, shouting orders. Jack leapt from behind the log, slamming into him with his shoulder. They both hit the ground hard, but Jack came up first, wrenching the alien's weapon from his hands and tossing it into the stream. The soldier lunged, but Jack drove his elbow into the alien's chest, knocking the wind out of him. The drone swooped lower, its light fixing on Jack. He dove to the side just as it fired a thin beam that scorched the bark off a tree. He grabbed a heavy rock from the water and hurled it upward. The rock smashed into the drone's front, and the machine spun wildly before crashing into the stream, sparks hissing in the water. The soldier who had been knocked into the water was getting back up, his weapon raised. Jack ducked low, grabbing the rope again and pulling with all his strength. Another heavy branch dropped from above, slamming into the soldier's back and sending him face first into the mud. The second soldier fired again, but Jack dove behind the barrier of branches, the shot missing by inches. He came up fast, swinging a long stick like a spear, striking the weapon from the soldier's hands. With a quick shove, Jack sent him stumbling backward into the stream. The fight was far from clean, but it was enough. The three soldiers were either down or scrambling to recover, and the drone was destroyed. Jack didn't wait for them to regroup. He splashed back toward the girl, who was standing now, her eyes wide with fear and something else, admiration. "Come on," he said, grabbing her hand. They ran along the stream, leaving the sounds of angry shouts behind them. The girl kept looking at him as they moved, as if she couldn't believe what she had just seen. "No human should fight like that," she murmured. Jack didn't answer. His breath was heavy, his muscles aching, but his mind was already on the next step. The fight had bought them time, but not safety. They would be back, and probably in greater numbers. He had to get her somewhere they couldn't follow. As they disappeared deeper into the forest, the sound of the stream faded, replaced by the soft crunch of leaves underfoot. The girl's grip on his hand stayed firm, and for the first time, she wasn't looking over her shoulder. She was looking ahead. The first light of dawn crept through the trees, turning the forest from black to shades of gray. Jack's breath came out in soft clouds as he walked, his legs heavy from hours of moving without rest. The girl was still holding his hand, her steps slower now, but she didn't complain. Her golden eyes scanned the world around them carefully, but there was no fear in them this time, only quiet determination. They climbed a small rise, and from the top, Jack spotted a shape half hidden in the morning mist. Metal walls, a few watchtowers, and a flag fluttering gently above the gate. His chest tightened with relief. "Almost there," he said, pointing ahead. "That's a human outpost." The girl tilted her head. "Will they help us?" "They will," Jack said, though part of him wondered if that was entirely true. Human outposts didn't often get involved in alien trouble. Still, he knew a few people inside who would at least hear him out. They moved downhill toward the gate, the ground crunching under their boots. As they got closer, two guards stepped forward, rifles in hand. Both wore dark green armor with the human crest on the shoulder. One of them frowned. "Jack? What in the void happened to you?" Jack stopped just short of the gate, keeping the girl slightly behind him. "Long story," he said. "I need a safe place for her. Now." The second guard's gaze fell on the girl, and his expression shifted from curiosity to shock. "She's not human." "She's not," Jack agreed, his tone firm. "But she's under my protection." The guards exchanged a look. One of them muttered, "You know her kind. They're not exactly friendly to us." Jack's eyes narrowed. "She's not her kind. She's herself. And she's not safe out there." The first guard hesitated, then tapped the comm unit on his wrist. "Commander, you'd better come to the gate." Moments later, the gate swung open, and a tall man with a scar down his cheek stepped out. His uniform was clean, his movements sharp. Jack knew him, Commander Rafe. They had served on the same freighter years ago. Rafe's eyes locked on Jack, then on the girl. "Explain," Rafe said simply. Jack told him everything in short, sharp sentences. How he had found her in the capsule, the chase, the hunters, the fight. He didn't leave out the part about the tracker or the network that wanted her. When he finished, Rafe crossed his arms. "You understand what you're asking. If we hide her, we make enemies. And not small ones." Jack met his gaze. "Then make them enemies, because if we hand her over, she's dead." For a long moment, Rafe didn't speak. Then he turned to the guards. "Bring them inside." The girl's grip on Jack's hand tightened as they passed through the gate. Inside, the outpost was alive with morning activity. Soldiers training, engineers checking equipment, the smell of fresh bread from the mess hall. But as they walked, Jack could feel the stares. Humans here weren't used to seeing an alien walk freely beside one of their own. Rafe led them to a small building near the back of the compound. Inside was a simple room with a cot, a table, and a chair. "She can stay here for now," he said. "But if word gets out—" "It won't," Jack interrupted. "I'll make sure of it." Rafe gave him a long look, then nodded and left. The girl sat carefully on the edge of the cot, her eyes darting around the room. "This is safe?" she asked. "For now," Jack said, kneeling so he was at her eye level. "But the people chasing you won't stop just because we're behind walls. They'll find a way to pressure the outpost. They'll send messages, threats, maybe worse." She looked down at her hands. "Then I'll go. I don't want anyone hurt because of me." Jack shook his head. "No. You're not running again. Not alone. If they want you, they go through me." Her eyes lifted to meet his, and something unspoken passed between them, an understanding, a promise. She reached out and placed her small, cool hand over his. "Why?" she asked softly. "You don't even know me." Jack thought for a moment before answering. "I know enough. You didn't deserve what happened to you, and no one deserves to be hunted like that." For the first time since he'd met her, a faint smile touched her lips. It was small, fragile, but real. The sound of footsteps outside broke the moment. Rafe stepped back in, his face tense. "We've got a problem," he said. "A messenger just arrived. The merchant's faction knows she's here. They're demanding we hand her over, or they'll consider it an act of war." The girl's smile vanished, and she looked at Jack, fear returning to her eyes. Jack stood, his jaw tightening. "Then tell them this," he said, his voice steady and cold. "Let them come. She's not going anywhere." Rafe studied him for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. "All right, but if this turns into a fight, you'd better be ready." Jack glanced back at the girl, who was watching him with a mix of fear and hope. "I've been ready since the moment I found her." Outside, the first warning bells of the outpost began to ring. The day was just beginning, but Jack knew it wouldn't be an ordinary one. This was no longer just about saving her life, it was about protecting her future. And for that, he was willing to face whatever came through those gates.